Hello, listeners. This is Musoke with another conversation on democratization of Africa. The case of Uganda in comparative perspective. Last week, the conversation concentrated on the impact of corruption on the society and in the economy. Today, I will continue with the same theme to trace the elements which we want to prove in a hypothesis. The hypothesis will be trying to demonstrate that there is a causal relationship between democracy and the control of corruption. And this is very important, and we will use some empirical data which is available today in publications. But before we do that, we want to pursue further the problem of the impact of corruption on society. And in this particular case, we are talking about the mutation from corruption to organized crime. This is a very, very important component of our conversation on corruption. You may be wondering what mutation from corruption to organized crime means. The meaning will become explicit as I proceed in this conversation. A closer look at Ugandan society as a whole indicates that there are many more serious consequences of corruption on the society as a whole. During the last 20 years, due to the failure to punish or control corruption under the law, corruption has mutated into various forms of organized crime in Uganda. This deadly consequence of corruption has not been carefully studied, let alone understood. We are therefore treading on new ground when we describe the mutation of corruption into organized crime. We invite other scholars, students of politics, and others, jurisprudence, to look at this phenomenon more carefully. The signs of this mutation are everywhere and very easy to trace. At first sight, the connection between corruption and organized crime may seem remote or even an illusion to some. However, on closer examination, the mutation between corruption and organized crime is not only logical, but sociologically expected or even predictable. One is the logical extension of the other. Hence, our use of the biological concept of mutation to describe the phenomenon of organized crime being a transformation of corruption into a new form of criminality through professionalization of corruption. When corruption is converted into a career, that is, a permanent source of livelihood for some people, or even a profession for some, it becomes organized crime. Corruption in the form of organized crime is a deadly social disease. It is more than a symptom of moral decay. The transition from corruption to organized crime is, however, a very smooth one. A few illustrations will suffice to make our point. First, let us look at the circumstances that make the mutation from corruption to organized crime possible. The behavior of the teachers we described in our earlier conversations is a good example to support our contention that the conclusion we reached that moral decay in Uganda is widespread and as a result has affected the behavior of the people in the entire society. If teachers who are supposed to be exemplars of good conduct can be corrupted, then anyone can be corrupted. One observer has noted that the challenging economic realities people encounter has transformed the character of the individual and to a great extent of the nation itself for the last 25 years. This observer adds that the hallmark of a contemporary Ugandan is survival, with the target being the attainment of the daily bread and other human pleasures that keep the skin together and provide the satisfaction that see one through to another day. The weight of this is that in the psyche of most of us, there is nothing like a long-term perspective. It is about short run, today and now. With this mindset, honesty, diligence, and efficiency are rendered irrelevant. The shortcut and the want to cut out corners come in handy. Even in the way we drive on the road, because we think as if there is no tomorrow. Most of our work is done haphazardly and is tainted with mediocrity. Secondly, in a situation where survival is the cornerstone, as it is in Uganda today, deception and form is more important than substance. As a result, Uganda leads most corrupt indices and has terrible records of human rights abuses, domestic violence, crimes against children, including human sacrifice, defilement, and rape. We may consider also that the increase in cases of HIV infection is more significant among married couples, meaning that they secretly maintain relationships besides those that they portray in the public eye as happily married people. The impact of corruption in Uganda affects the welfare of the individual and the whole society, leading to a decline in education, performance of the economy, and the rate of economic development. Rule of law seems to be irrelevant under these circumstances. Because corruption under NRM is institutionalized, very few cases are effectively litigated or punished. IGG is ineffective as Justice Mwanda's futile debacle to reappoint her for a second term demonstrated recently. Several MPs ganged up and opposed her reappointment because she had taken a tough line by enforcing the leadership code enacted by Parliament to prevent or punish corruption committed by MPs. Ken Richamuzi lost his seat during Mwanda's tenure as IGG head. The laws and institutions set up to fight corruption were compromised by the political tentacles emanating from institutionalized corruption within NRM regime as a political organization. Among the corruption scandals we have discussed above in this series of conversations, like the junk helicopters, the police corruption, the privatization of Uganda Commercial Bank, the Chogam procurement, and the mismanagement of the Global Fund. Only these only four low status individuals only have been charged and convicted for embezzlement of the Global Fund money. We discussed these cases last week. This minimal enforcement measure, however, was due to unrelenting pressure from the outside because the Global Fund was a form of foreign aid over which Uganda had little control. Without the donors of the Global Fund money in Geneva, the probabilities are high that no one would have been charged, let alone convicted for embezzlement in the Global Fund scandal. The knowledge by the public that there are no serious consequences for corruption is an inducement to mutate corruption into organized crime. One explanation which has been given for inadequate litigation of corruption has been the shortage of judicial manpower. This is, however, more of an excuse than an explanation for the prevalence of corruption in Uganda. The inadequate judicial manpower has not shown sufficient determination to fight corruption effectively. This is mainly due to the fact that moral decay has affected or even compromised Ugandan society when it comes to the enforcement of corruption laws. There has been judicial reform, but it is not yet clear whether the new anti-corruption court at the High Court will make much difference, since it has only 2 full-time judges, with as of June 3 years ago, and they had a backlog of 350 cases at that time. I'm sure today the backlog is much bigger. Trying one case may require over 200 working hours, and the rule of law demands it, no matter how expensive and slow the process becomes, because procedural rules, which are at the core of the enforcement of the rule of law and the administration of justice, should not be compromised. As the saying goes, it is better for justice to quit 9 guilty defendants than to convict one innocent person. The judiciary for the judiciary, the police, the IGG, the DPP, and the Ministry of Ethics, who are supposed to enforce corruption laws, together, they share only 7% of the national budget. Our national priorities are part of the problem, therefore. Moreover, the number of police personnel, magistrates, and MPs who have been charged with or involved in the or resigned because of corruption crimes is sufficient to make anyone cringe with skepticism about effective enforcement of corruption laws under the NRM regime. One individual civil servant, Jamwa, was accused of abuse of office and causing substantial financial loss to NSSS, of the Social Security Fund, in the amount of shillings 2.7 billion shillings of the workers' pension funds. He was also involved in the shady Temangalo land deal, where the inflated value of land owned by the minister, who was also Secretary General of NRM, Amama Mbabas, was sold to National Social Security Fund in clear violation of the procurement laws for an inflated value of about 11 billion shillings for about 400 acres of land located many miles outside of the capital city, Kampala. This was a typical case of institutional corruption within the NRM regime. The state lost billions of shillings in one transaction, money that could have been used for development. Even though Jamwa was later convicted of the crime of causing financial loss, there was no way of recovering all the money corruption consumed in one gulp in the Temangalo transaction. On October 15, 2007, the Daily Monitor reported a bizarre racket in which officials with access to huge deposits of public money hold the cash in special accounts and reap from it interest. The scheme is a big, complex syndicate involving the biggest ministries in the country, such as finance, defense, health, and the Bank of Uganda. Officials in these institutions deposit, say, 1.4 billion shillings in the so-called fixed deposit accounts in a commercial bank at a fixed rate of 4% for 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, they withdraw the money. Hopefully, they redeposit it back in the treasury and keep the interest amounting to hundreds of millions of shillings. These types of transactions are more than corruption. They are crime. It is not even clear how an individual can make a huge deposit in a commercial bank without following proper procedures and regulations that require disclosures of the sources of big monetary assets such as those. Under what authority do bank officials approve the movement and transfer of public funds from one bank to another. This should clearly implicate the banking industry officials in the facilitating such corrupt schemes as having been compromised in order to authorize the making of those huge deposits. These transactions represent the transition from mere corruption to organized crime. It is also a good example of the extent to which NRM's institutional corruption has reached, because the officials involved are trusted members of NRM, such as ministers and permanent secretaries, who alone have access to such huge amounts of government money, but were not investigated by the IGG, prosecuted by the DPP, Director of Public Prosecution, or disciplined by their bosses, even though their corruptive schemes were uncovered or exposed by the media, as it was in this particular case. When this happens, the line between from mere corruption to organized crime is crossed. NRM regime culture is the only explanation for the tolerance of this compound, complex, deep political problems of institutional corruption thriving unchecked in Uganda. However, organized crime may be realized and can be illustrated through other corrupt channels. We turn to organized crime proper. The most dramatic case that illustrates the presence of organized crime in Uganda was reported in Bukedde, Kusande, sometime back in March 3rd, 2012. According to Bukedde Kusande, organized groups with names such as Chikankane, Yellow Force, Black Force have headquarters in different parts of Kampala. Bukedde Kusande met and interviewed a young man who worked for these groups. The young man, who is from Masaka, Bukomansimbi, was recruited into the organized crime syndicate from school by his friend Matovu in 2000. The recruiter was related to an individual whose identity is revealed as Captain Semogere, who owned a gun they used in their organized crime business. Matov introduced the recruit to his bosses in Gomba, where they ambushed automobiles belonging to local traders. They stole from the traders, border, and even raped women as a sideline. After being recruited, his bosses liked him very much because they noted that the new recruit was a very enthusiastic and determined operator, judged by the missions assigned to him. However, after almost a decade in the organized crime gang, he escaped from these gangs and was in hiding at the time he was interviewed by Bukedde Kusande. He told Bukedde Kusande that the bosses behind these groups include commanders in the police force. The commanders are responsible for the murders and robberies committed by the gangs. The executioners of the missions are treated as mere employees of the gang. After recruitment, the first test the recruit was given was to ambush a truck transporting bread for the company known as Kidawalime. The truck was coming from Gomba at a place called Nsambu. The group attacked the bread truck. They shot and killed one woman. The driver was also shot in the arm but managed to escape with severe wounds. On another occasion, they ambushed a truck carrying cows from Gomba. In this mission, they used the AK-47 belonging to their captain. Now you see how complex organized crime is, which arises from corruption. It involves even sponsors, business financiers, and even weapons from government officials. One of their bosses was a very influential figure in government. Whenever they were arrested and sent to police custody or prison, he managed to get them released. Police officers in the area feared their influential boss. They used to wear masks on their missions for disguise. In Gomba, among their activities were stealing cows, goats, border, money from gas stations, shops, and airtime sellers. They shot several people in these operations. Among the victims killed was Katende of Mpenja, who was shot getting out of the bathroom, but because the children managed to recognize them, they were attacked at Matovu's home and Semogarere's mother at Gomba. The home was totally destroyed. The battle was so intense that Kinoni police could not suppress the attackers. Law enforcement sent for reinforcement from Mpiji. After Rogers killed a policeman who they swiftly escaped to Kampala. Now I'm narrating this because this sounds like civil war. Some policemen are on the side of the gangs, and others are fighting the gangs. And it becomes pathetic. And yet, this is reality. I mean, these are real cases which have been documented and reported. The bosses of the gangs rented a house for them at Lungu Janatete, where they received more training in robbery and killing people. Imagine that. They met other members with whom they coordinated their activities. The motorcycle group's job was to survey and identify potential projects. You know, this sounds like a business project. Their jobs included being hired by the rich landlords who wanted to evict tenants. In their strategies, they would kill a few people, and the following day the remaining tenants would voluntarily evacuate the area for fear of being killed. Among the other jobs gangs did were being hired by married people to eliminate their spouses or those with Vivanja disputes who who wanted to avenge themselves. A certain individual called Kabagambe was a friend of their boss in Lubaga. He had a house in Kibumbiro, Busega, where they got their instructions for new operations. You can hear this description. This thing, it sounds like business, and and it operates like a business. And definitely, this was because corruption went out of control. From 2000 to 2011, the gang I'm talking about estimated that they killed about 300 people. In 2011 alone, they had 30 assignments to kill people. They robbed in the Natete area and other suburbs of Kampala. For example, they attacked Musai's shop in Natete and robbed an estimated 40 million shillings in one day. And the narrator interviewed by Bukedde Kusande was the commander of the operation. The robbers were, however, unhappy because their bosses gave them very little money as their share compared to the size of the booty they brought home to their bosses. One day they robbed a Chinese businessman on Ben Kiwanuka Street, who he imports handbags for ladies, I guess. They also stole computers, DVDs, and telephone at Dido, where they found a young Asian man on duty on whose head they pointed the muzzle of the gun. On that occasion, they robbed telephones, DVDs, and money. On the same day, they ambushed a vehicle from a farming on Mitiana Road. After robbing it, they retired with their booty to Kampala. On another day, the narrator and another individual identified as Mansu robbed a trader identified as Francis Jr., who sold airtime. Before the robbery, members of the gang followed him from Makindye to Najanankumbi, where they sprayed him with bullets. Before they go for a robbery operation, the members of the gang are tuned up. They are given money to buy drugs such as marijuana and other intoxicating substances. That's tuning up. In each area of operation, there are bosses who do the planning and give instructions on how to execute a specific robbery. If a member of a gang fails to, on 3 consecutive times in his missions, the bosses secretly plan to eliminate him by killing him so that he may not conspire to reveal their illegal activities. The gang normally uses motorcycles to escape quickly from the scene of the crime and use expensive cars when they have long-distance missions. They deposit money on special accounts. They deposit money on special accounts if the mission is a long distance away in order to avoid moving around with a lot of money. They also have lawyers who help them to get released whenever they get arrested. Now, when a new member is recruited in these gangs, he has to take an oath of silence and swear not to disclose anything to his relatives or friends without the permission of his bosses. A member of the gang cannot refuse any assignment and must disclose his location every 2 hours and report what he's doing. The groups have contacts in police stations who work with them to accomplish their missions. They also have an army officer they work with in Old Kampala area of Kampala city. This officer has helped the gang a lot in accomplishing their missions. They also have journalists such as Box Spanda and Gearbox. These are, of course, names, fake names created to not disclose the true identity, who spy for them and help them disseminate news about their movements. Now you see how complex this situation has become. It began as a simple corruption, and it became a business, and a business for that matter out of control. The gangs operate as a military unit. The people they work with are trained security officers, and some have been in the organization for a long time. The gang is very much interested in people who sell airtime because they move around with a lot of money, and their bosses have planted spies in their organizations who follow their movements with the knowledge of how much money they make a day. The main reason why the narrator was disclosing the secrets of the gangs is because he was haunted by the time, haunted all the time by the innocent deaths he had caused. He claims to have met Kaihura, to whom he was introduced by a young man identified as Junior. He also claims he informed Kaihura everything he knew. At the time he disclosed the secrets and activities of the gangs, he lived in fear because he suspected his former colleagues were looking for him, most likely to kill him, of course. They were aware that he had disclosed all the information published in Buket de Kusande to the authorities and the rest of the world. He says that if he gets a chance to meet the president, his first request would be to ask him for forgiveness for killing innocent people. He says that he would also tell the president all the secrets of the business of the gangs. Now you can draw your own conclusions. This information has been published. Many people have read it, just as I did. Buket de Kusande reports that one of the victims who was shot in Napraville but survived the ordeal reported his incident to the police with his relatives to Kale Kaihura, who handed over the case to Simon Kawesi, police commander of Kampala, but apparently no action has been taken. In October, by the way, this reminds me of what Matthias Mpuga was saying today on the Gwanga Mujje program, that if the police invested all their energy they used to persecute political opponents, they would and they used that effort to look for criminals like these I'm describing, Uganda would be a much safer place than it is today. In order, in October 2011, the gangs, this is just last year, not long time ago, the gangs shot Christopher Diriamumeisho on his way home at Kazobwais. He died in the hospital. The motives for these killings are not made clear. So now you see how complicated our situation is and what institutional corruption can turn into, how it can mutate. Mutate is the word I'm using, it in a biological term, to change or to be transformed from one to form into another, from corruption into organized crime, which amounts to professional corruption. I reproduce a translated version of this report from Buke de Kusandi, which was narrated in the second person, in order to illustrate how uncontrolled corruption has successfully mutated into sophisticated organized crime. The trend of this mutation is on the increase unless drastic action is taken to contain the situation through democratization of Uganda and the restoration of the rule of law. The criminal gangs are going to rule the capital of Uganda and terrorize innocent people in the war country. Remember that organized crime profits from someone else's effort or economic production. The simple truth is that, as the details of this report indicate, in graphic details, there is no difference between terrorism and organized crime. And yet, the only terrorists NRM regime talks about are those openly demanding the exercise of their human rights to assemble, to associate, and to express themselves freely. In that respect, NRM is an ally of the organized crime conducted by terrorists. As long as Museveni can stay in power, he would rather tolerate the terror of organized crime than grant the people their political freedom if there is a chance that he may lose his illegal tenure in State House. Let us look more closely at the terrorism of organized crime directly caused by corruption under NRM. As we have illustrated above, by the corruption scandals that have plagued NRM, uncontrolled corruption is a symptom of the absence of democracy and the rule of law. That means that organized crime cannot be controlled or eliminated before corruption is controlled or eliminated. In this context, the equation of organized crime with terrorism is not idle or loose talk. From the content of the newspaper reports I've given, it is clear that terrorism and organized crime have a close kinship. Organized crime recruits its members in secret, so does terrorism. In a democratic society, that should trigger the bells of freedom ringing loud. Second, all recruits of organized crime must take an oath of allegiance to abide by the secret orders of their bosses, whose identity must remain unknown. Third, the act of the criminal gang, like that of, we can take that call. Whoever has a question can.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
Hello, Mr. Mubilu. This is Dorothy. First of all, I would like to thank you so very much for the wonderful job. Thank you. I have been following. It sounds like it is clear to me, but it is just disturbing because I can't help myself. I'm just wondering what your take on this. If that young man, first he said that he was introduced to Mr. Kaihura, and then later on when he gets hunted by all what he has done wrong, then he goes and he said, I've done ABCD, and both Kaihura and Kawes, they don't seem to do anything. So, yes, as much as we say organized crime and corruption, and in Uganda, a lot of things are happening. You know how the government, they do things, but they don't want to be, attached to those things right away. We have the Chiboko squad, we have these people with guns in layers, and everything. To me, it seems that there would be no reason, really, if Kaihura was interested and Kawes not to take on this. So, I don't know if I'm right, because my thinking is some of these, like that last gentleman you mentioned, he was killed and the motive of being killed was not clear. To me, this young man might not know. They might not tell them all the details. Even they might give them the security officers with the gun. They might have all lawyers, and they might not know really who their top boss is. But the way it sounds, it seems like in some instances the government is using these people, to it look like a mafia or something, not really mafias, but these boys are used to do certain things, to kill certain people where the government, they don't want to be identified that we saw people with their, uniforms, ABCD. So I don't know what you think about that. To me, it seems like it is more than just organized crime, There are some very, very, very people on the top who are supporting this. There's no way Kaihura would be walking away from this. It is the same way when the Wombre was really used, because what we could hear, they are, thugs, we go get these thugs, but actually they were after those, boys who worked with Andrew Kaira. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify on that one. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The one reason why I'm making these presentations is not purely academic. Simply, although the academic part of it is there, the main part is to make people understand the nature of this problem. It's a very complex one. Now, is there a connection between government and this terrorism? The information I have and which I have provided contains names of government officials, Kaihura, Kawese, and others. This guy who told this story, And this was published in Buke de Kusande. This is a government paper. So I would assume that under the ethics of journalism, these people did their work, they did their research, they verified the information they had to the best of their ability, and therefore, before they published it. And if they can publish it, then I am convinced that since it was never denied, I've not read anything Kaihura denying that he was mentioned by thugs who don't know what they are talking about or whatever. I've been trying to follow this story, but there has never been a denial from these people, Kawesi and Kaihura. So anybody can draw their own conclusions about this. That's as far as I can go for concerning the involvement of the government. But the most even important thing to me is this causal relationship. Will come. I'm sure later on in the second hour, because the first hour is almost over. In the second hour, we are going to deal with a hypothesis, a causal to explore the. Yeah.
We have a call.
Yeah, I'm tuning in, actually listening in at the same time. Hello?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm contributing to the discussant, and actually the topic corruption in Uganda is one of the saddest things that it's unfortunate it's happening to a country like ours. And the gentleman has raised some very critical issues, and even with concrete evidence, because it's very alarming how corruption has been intertwined in even development programs, because he talked about the money that the government received for HIV, AIDS, and all that, and it was diverted into people's pockets. So this definitely is painting the picture that there is either something wrong with the whole system, that either the government or the president is overlooking and encouraging, whereby that he knows that so and so, so and so, which is like, and there's a paper I'm writing which I'll probably discuss in the future of your shows, when I'll probably even share it with you guys, on why the UK continues to give aid to Uganda despite the fact that corruption is rampant. Yeah. And that's actually what I want to talk about. But I'm still listening, and I might come back later. But let the gentleman carry on. Yeah.
Thank you for your comment. Thank you for
my name is Patrick. Actually, I'm at Middlesex University, and I'm a politics student. I'm studying politics.
Okay, that's very nice to hear. And
all right, sir.
I'm glad you are taking interest in these discussions, because they are very important.
Yes, sir.
We cannot solve these problems unless we face them head on.
Exactly.
So that's the whole purpose of these conversations.
All right, then. Thank you very much. I'm listening in. All right.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Well, the last caller talked about the link between aid and corruption in Uganda. Well, I must say that part of the blame goes to us if we have not played the diplomatic role effectively to link the foreign aid with the corruption. Britain did cut off some aid recently, and other countries, Norway and Ireland, when this Prime Minister's office scandal broke, they demanded, some of them demanded their aid back because it was being misused. But we as Ugandans did not become very vocal to make sure that no more aid is sent, because there is no guarantee it's not going to be diverted into corrupt activities. But when the last caller made, came in, I was talking about a hypothesis arising from Dorothy's questions and comments, a hypothesis of a causal relationship between democracy and corruption, that you can only control corruption through a democratic process, because it is only a democratic process that enforces accountability and ensures transparency. There is no known other method I am aware of from history and from contemporary world where you can, because I already have mentioned this, that when we look at the Western world, they still have corruption, but they deal with it. They, for example, send to prison prominent people, regardless of your status. If you are caught in a scandal, a corrupt scandal, you pay the price, and that's the only way. And you see, the other important thing about democracy is democracy is by its nature an adversarial process. In other words, when political parties, for example, compete for power, and if they effectively compete for power, they are going to expose each other's corrupt deals. And that's how you expose. And once those deals are exposed, then the courts and the attorney generals and the law enforcement have no choice but to take action. But the whole thing depends on the democratic process, which in the first place makes the leaders, the administrators, the police accountable to what they are doing. What is happening in Uganda, I mean, first of all, the police is politicized. Politicized in the sense that you have military men running a civilian institution, which is the police. That in itself is a problem. And also, in a democratic system, a person who leads, who is heading the police should be accountable to the people and not to the head of state. I mean, this is where the federal system comes in, and we will discuss all these issues. Decentralization in Uganda did nothing to democratize the system, simply because this power structure is still centralized. It's Museveni from State House who runs to the markets in Kampala. It's Museveni who resolves the land disputes in Bugerere. It's Museveni who recommends which investor should be given free land to start, build a hotel. So that you can see right there that there is no democratic process even in the administrative process. So I want to stop here for a few minutes, because the first hour has elapsed, and then I will be back in a few minutes to complete the conversation. Thank you.
Fellow citizens, We call upon you to practice resistance and protest against Museveni. We call upon you to oppose strongly the Museveni government, which is responsible for the downfall of Uganda. It is important to know that Museveni is afraid of the millions of people who are living for that day, for the light of day when Uganda will be liberated from his dictatorial regime. Fellow citizens, it's been 24 years of dictatorship. We should all know that at present our drive for freedom has already grown so strong that Museveni has already begun to change his tactics. We call upon people to participate, to organize silent stand-ins for a free Uganda. We call upon people to demonstrate that we're tired of him. We call upon governments in the United States of America and abroad, people in responsible positions, politicians, only to act in the service of peace, justice, and freedom for Uganda. We call upon people to use all legal and imaginative means and methods in order to ensure peace, justice, and freedom for Uganda. We call upon people from the north and south, from the east and west, and yes, from the central province of Uganda to be loyal to one another. We must preserve our loyalty to human dignity. We call upon people once again not to wait until it is too late to begin thinking about a free Uganda. We call for a new attitude. Arise, fellow citizens, arise. Let us fight for a free Uganda. Museveni must.
I'm back to the second hour to complete our conversation on corruption in Uganda. I'm happy that people have responded and raised the issues, questions. Definitely, we must look at these. The purpose of these conversations is to stimulate ideas from the people, apart from information, people to inform the people about what is going on and how complicated it is and how difficult it's going to be to resolve our situation. It is clear that only regime change can deal with this situation and resolve this situation. There's no way you can talk about NRM reforming itself. But before the callers came in, I was enumerating trying to point out the connection and the similarities between terrorism and organized crime. And the third point is that the activities of the criminal gang, like that of the terrorists, are illegal. They have no legitimacy in a democratic system of government. And also the fourth, that organized crime, the crime gangs do not have a rational code of conduct. The force they use is disproportionate. Their victims are chosen at random, and they are almost always innocent. The victims are always innocent. So you can imagine your relative walking on a street, and it happens to be in the crossfire between these gangs, and they're shooting you like that. So your life can be taken anytime, not because of any mistake on your part, but because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unless we resolve this situation, it will get worse. Fifth, organized crime can only succeed under at least two conditions. First, the rule of law is not effectively enforced, which allows criminal gangs to operate with impunity. And second, because of the latter, the failure of the rule of law, some of the law enforcement officials either actively collaborate with the organized crime syndicates or turn a blind eye to their activities because they benefit from them. In the case of Uganda, the rule of law is not effectively enforced, and law enforcement officials seem to be actively involved in organized crime. We must take action to restore the rule of law through democratization. Now, I come to the hypothesis part of this conversation. The hypothesis implicit in the arguments of these conversations relates to the control and punishment of corruption. We cited many examples at the beginning of these conversations to illustrate the fact that corruption exists in democratic political systems. We, however, know that due to strict enforcement of the principles of political accountability and the rule of law, democratic political systems are capable of controlling and punishing corruption. When we learn from the numerous corrupt scandals under NRM and the failure of NRM regime to enforce the law and hold the corrupt officials accountable, especially those in the top hierarchies of NRM system, or even fight organized crime, is the basis of the validity of this hypothesis. Democracy is the only effective weapon against corruption. There is now sufficient evidence to substantiate this hypothesis. In Africa, regimes which are democratizing their political systems are more capable of controlling corruption. Controlling corruption also enables the economy to grow faster, whereas a corrupt and undemocratic system stifles economic development, and organized crime makes the situation much worse. At the regional level, for example, in Africa, is the most corrupt and least democratic and developed region is Africa. Within Africa, the least democratic countries are also the most corrupt. For example, the countries which score less than a 2.0 corrupt perception index, that is of the Transparency International, they consistently also are the most corrupt. These countries ranking them from the bottom include Somalia, Guinea, Sudan. Now we are talking about northern Sudan because the new Sudan is very young and has not been yet tested. Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, Burundi, Angola, and Congo. Now, these countries are the poorest and also always at the bottom of the country ranking of corruption in the world. When one looks at the African region, the most democratic countries are always in the top ranks of the least corrupt countries. among the least corrupt countries in African region, the top 10 countries, beginning with the least corrupt, are Botswana, Mauritius, Cape Verde, Seychelles, South Africa, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Swaziland. The country which is always on top of the least corrupt in Africa is Botswana. It has been democratic since it gained independence in 1967. It has never experienced a coup d'etat or a failure to hand over power peacefully from one leader to another. Not only has it peacefully challenged leaders, but it changed leaders, but it has also achieved phenomenal economic development compared to the rest of Africa. Now, why am I saying this? Botswana's income per capita is $13,893. $13,000. That's a very high figure. And Uganda's is $1,272. So Botswana, South Africa, the income per capita is $10,565. That's way high. So Botswana has a higher per capita than South Africa, and definitely the per capita for Botswana is about 7 times that of Uganda. So you can see the connection between between democracy and the economic development, and also the control of corruption. There has been another institute now, which is also now compiling an index. This is an index, the Prosperity Index. And now the Prosperity Index also shows exactly the same result. Uganda, this is the Prosperity Index is compiled by an institute called Legatum, and it shows, for example, Uganda is at the bottom. Its number is 117, listed 117 out of 142 countries. Botswana is way up near South Africa and Ghana and the other progressive African countries. So, given these facts, there is no reason to attribute Africa's underdevelopment to colonialism or imperialism. Half a century after independence was achieved, as Walter Rodney's school of thought, embraced by Kajavago Musoke, teaches us. Museveni himself wrote an undergraduate thesis at Dar es Salaam University, supervised by Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney was a very revolutionary orator. I remember him giving lectures and debating with Ali Mazrui at Makerere when I was there, and but his theories are definitely invalid as far as I can tell. But the important point here is that Walter Rodney's intellectual influence on Museveni was very great. It's very obvious also. Even if Museveni is trying to run away from those influences, I'm not so sure he has done a good job, since he keeps on quoting Mao Zedong every time he speaks. He quoted Mao Zedong in the General Assembly, UN General Assembly, and he quoted Mao Zedong again in his independence speech. So that he is idolizing Mao Zedong. Anybody idolizing Mao Zedong cannot be democratic. You can deceive us, but we are not going to accept it. So these facts betray Museveni's the degree his ideological deception is not going to work. South Africa and Ghana also rank the least corrupt countries in Africa, in the African region. At the international level, Botswana ranks among the top 40 least corrupt with about 6.0 CPI. South Africa, which has just been liberated from apartheid, is among the top 60 worldwide with above 5.0 CPI, and Ghana among the top 70 worldwide with above 4.0 CPI. These figures are neither statistical accidents nor ideological coincidences. They contain a very important message about the causal relationship between democracy and the control of corruption through public officials' accountability. Uganda's CPI score in 2008 was a mere 2.6 CPI, together with Mozambique, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. The three countries had a common country ranking of 126 worldwide. Uganda's score fell to 2.5 CPI in 2009, ranking together with Mozambique, Nigeria, and Mauritania at a rank of 130 worldwide out of 180 rankings. Uganda's CPI continues to slide down every day. Therefore, for all the rhetoric NRM leaders are dishing out, Uganda's corruption index is a good indicator of the absence of democracy in the country and the increasing poverty, despite an artificially high growth rate of 70% a few years ago of GDP in the 1990s. This means that corruption siphons off any growth rate that occurs and dumps it in the bank accounts of the corrupt millionaires, of whom Uganda now has a substantial number. Therefore, it does not even matter who you blame, individuals or NRM as a political institution. The fact is that the low corruption CPI for Uganda is good evidence of the absence of democracy in Uganda, and explains increasing poverty and failure of poverty reduction programs in spite of relatively healthy economic growth rates Museveni proudly cites every year in his budget speeches. The budget speech of 2012-2013 shows that the economic growth rate of Uganda is now below 3.5, and the situation is likely to get worse as the global economy goes through another recession. Democratization has a structural aspect which we must mention. In the case of Uganda, the structural aspect of democratization is found in the debate to establish a federal system of government. Federalism has the constitutional effect of insulating administration of the federal state from the national government, which may be corrupt. For example, the corrupt multiplication of districts, the bloated cabinets in the central government, and the excessive presidential advisors are unlikely to survive in an accountable federal system of government whose budget is debated and approved by the whole federal system instead of a unitary system in which the executive of the central government dominates the budgetary process. One of the components of UPC political philosophy Museveni effectively adopted is that of a unitary political system. In this respect, Museveni cannot distinguish himself from Obote. They are identical twins. The federal government would have no power to abuse its authority by creating new districts in the federal states, providing military training for Banyara or any other ethnic group within the estate of the federation, or appoint an army of RDOs, the district officers who squander national resources. By looking at the list of the things the federal government will have no power to do, we can clearly see the checks and balances of the federal system. We are not simply talking about the theory of federalism here, but the actual practical desirable limitations on power of the federal government and the accountability of the public officials at all levels of government. The excessive concentration of power in a unitary system contributes to Uganda's failure to reduce poverty, maintain the crumbling infrastructure in the rural areas, or even effectively prosecute corrupt officials of the top ranks of the central government structures. The low-level officials who are prosecuted for corruption are the tip of the iceberg created by the NRM institutional corruption. Such institutional corruption can only be tackled effectively when there is a chance in a change in the regime culture itself. This can only occur when a new political party with a new set of leaders takes over the government. This is how changes have occurred in Ghana, in South Africa, and in Botswana. Democratization of Uganda must begin with the regime change and constitutional reform similar to that to what happened in those African countries that are now prospering due to effective regime change. These countries have term limits, which are the most effective mechanism to change a regime culture peacefully. After all this, the hypothesis I was trying to articulate is simple. There is a causal relationship where we have sufficient evidence that there is a causal relationship between corruption and democracy, or the absence of democracy. When there is democracy, corruption is controlled because of the principle of accountability and the adversarial nature of the democratic process itself. Now, if our hypothesis is valid, Uganda needs democratization in order to fight corruption effectively, especially in its form of organized crime. However, the prognosis for democratization of Uganda at this time through NRM is very bad for three main reasons. These are the iron hand of history, which continues to negatively influence the political behavior of the people and thereby control politics in Uganda from the graves of past dictators. The political, social, and economic consequences of corruption perpetrated and institutionalized by NRM regime on Ugandan society. And lastly, the uncertain or ambiguous predictions of social theory on the future of democracy in Uganda. The traumatic history of Uganda, which we outlined in our earlier conversations, has made the odds for normal democratization of Uganda, that is, smooth and progressive reform of the political system, either very low or nearly impossible. One source of the problem is the fact that the post-colonial history of Uganda has been dominated by brutal dictators who have decimated all elements of political freedom essential to inactivating and sustaining the democratic process. This has led to pathological fear of the state and, as a result, causing the people to hide behind apathy instead of courageously confronting the political enemy head-on in order to liberate ourselves. The incumbent ruler in 2012, for example, is the least likely Ugandan head of state to democratize Uganda voluntarily or through the normal political processes, because democratization of for Museveni is a suicidal political act whose results are to his disadvantage and detrimental to his corrupt personal interests. Museveni, a man addicted to political power, has entrenched his regime in power more than any other Ugandan leader has ever done in the past. This necessarily leads to a bad prognosis for democratization of Uganda as long as Museveni or NRM is in power. The closest analogy to the hurdles of democratization of Uganda is Tanzania, where Nyerere left Chama cha Mapinduzi entrenched in power with no effective political position. The opposition had been wiped out by Nyerere's one-party system between 1965 and 1991. The only difference with Uganda is that Nyerere relinquished power voluntarily in 1985, but the opposition has had an uphill battle to build new political parties since 1991. Political infrastructure is always difficult to create. The situation is worse under dictatorships like that of Museveni, where political freedom is denied at the maximum. Contrast that with the process of democratization in Kenya, where the opposition took over power 2002 and managed to enact a new progressive constitution. Unlike Uganda, both Kenya and Tanzania have term limits in their constitutions, which are the most effective weapons in democratization through peaceful regime change. The situation in Uganda is very different. Anybody dreaming about Museveni voluntarily retiring must quickly dispel such naive thoughts. Now, the iron hand of history. First of all, Museveni corruptly removed the term limits from the Constitution in 2005 to ensure his indefinite longevity in power. Second, the excessive use of the military to accomplish political objectives is an ominous sign signaling Museveni's determination to hang on to power indefinitely at any price. In this respect, as we demonstrated in earlier conversation, Museveni is not different from Obote or Amin, because both of them, or three of them, have practiced what I call the state terrorism. They both in political strategies, they are similar, and also in personality. Like Amin and Obote, Museveni wants to rule Uganda for life. While history has thus compounded the odds for democratization of Uganda, other sociological factors have intervened to make the situation worse. Apathy and political timidity, even though not invincible, have yet to be overcome. Hopefully, probably unexpectedly, in the same way as they were overcome in Poland and in the Middle East through instant social change. Apathy and timidity, just as in Uganda, prolonged the life of Arab dictatorship. Hello?
Go on, Mr. Mubilu. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, go on.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, so I can go on?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. Sorry, listeners. I have been cut off the air. I don't know what happened. It could be Museveni's ghost trying to attack Mukunja, not knowing that I have effective mechanism to fight it. But anyway, I'll continue. I was talking about apathy and timidity as problems in Uganda. Just as in Uganda, the prolonged life of Arab dictatorship did not ensure its everlasting durability because social change is inevitable and occasionally very unpredictable. Fortunately, implications of this fact have so far escaped the attention of every greedy dictator addicted to power like Muammar Gaddafi and Yoweri Museveni. Leaders addicted to power can rarely anticipate their fate in history or wisely prepare for it. They cannot indefinitely postpone it since they have finite lives like everybody else. Social change, however powerful its effect may be in its normal course of transforming society, cannot take place in one day. This is the cruel reality inherent in any political struggle. Social change is normally slow and incremental, even though at times, as in the Middle East, it can suddenly explode and destroy political myths, thereby rupturing political inertia in the entire society or the region. Therefore, apathy, fear, and timidity are not unique to Ugandan community. Poland, for a long time, suffered a similar fate under communism before Pope John Paul II paid a visit to Poland. Quote, his greatest impact, of course, was in Poland, where his dramatic 1979 visit, as one Polish bishop said, altered the mentality of fear, the fear of the police, the fear of tanks, of losing your job, of not getting promoted, of being thrown out of school, of failing to get a passport. People learned that if they ceased to fear the system, was itself helpless. I take this quotation from Samuel P. Huntington. In the book is The Third Wave, Democratization in the Late 20th Century. He was quoting about what happened in Poland. And I think we can learn from these other. That's why this my general thesis is democratization of Africa, the case of Uganda in comparative perspective, because no knowledge, complete knowledge about democracy exists in one political system. You have to compare what has happened both in history and in the contemporary world in order to arrive at an approximate truth about politics and democratization. That means that the road ahead for democratization in Uganda is full of obstacles: political, psychological, economic, military, demographic, and systemic. Unlike the urbanized people of Tunisia, for example, or Egypt, Libya, or Syria, the Ugandans are predominantly a poor rural population with rudimentary means of communication. One needs one some creativity in mobilizing them in non-traditional ways. The urban elite are very unreliable, they are greedy, and therefore easily corrupted, as we have seen. Although these facts and conclusions lead inevitably to a bad prognosis for democratization of Uganda, we have to remember that social change goes on all the time, and occasionally may be unexpectedly precipitated by unforeseen factors. In this age of instant technology, oppressed people have already realized that it is possible to defeat well-armed, brutal dictators with collective courage in the streets of the capital. Dictators should take note of this new political reality and learn the lessons of history. Under the very repressive colonial regimes, independence movements against the colonial regimes had very low odds of success before World War II. Participation in the war by Africans changed everything. For example, during the first decade of the 20th century, the colonial rulers confidently believed that their mission in Africa would last at least another 2 centuries. They grossly misjudged and misunderstood the process of social change, of which they were not fully aware. World War II, acting as a political catalyst, shattered the supremacy of the colonial myth, suddenly causing social change that precipitated the independence movements in the decade of 1945-1955. Similarly, the liberation movements that confronted brutal ideologies in Russia, Eastern Europe, Portugal, and South Africa gathered momentum due to snowball effect when it suddenly dawned on the oppressed people everywhere that political the political tiger they feared most, as Mao Zedong would put it, was actually a paper tiger. The people realized suddenly that they could successfully demand and get their political freedom from entrenched brutal dictators. By comparison, in the context of Uganda, Museveni, whose intellect is far deeper, in my opinion, than that of the great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Martin Luther King, who led historical political crusades through social change, cannot be the only unique political leader in history who will defy the laws of history and social change. Museveni must accordingly be warned. He will be overthrown if he does not quit voluntarily. Second, the pervasive corruption. The second factor that makes the democratization of Uganda difficult is corruption. Corruption, whose different aspects are extensively described in this conversation, is the most serious obstacle to democratization in Uganda. Fortunately, however, corruption is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. Those who have profited from corruption unwilling to see NRM relinquish power. The same is true for those who have abused their offices within NRM regime, including the head of state, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. The beneficiaries of corruption are all worried about Damocles' sword hanging above their heads. As a result of the most resistance against the democratization of Uganda is from the corrupt who grimly look at the impending demise of NRM regime and sadly contemplate the consequences of Uganda without the NRM piggy bank. What the corrupt people in Uganda have to realize is that investing in corruption is always a short-term, short-sighted, precarious gambling decision, which will inevitably come back to haunt and bite them. And here, I must warn those who are moving around with the Museveni and the NRM, thinking that they will be in power forever and ever. From what I've said, they are mistaken. From Ferdinand Marcos, excuse me, in the Philippines, to Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga in Zaire, Congo. Corruption is a short-term investment that can take your life or send you to prison for a long time. Today, international law has paved the way for corrupt leaders to forfeit their loot, as we shall demonstrate below. In a rational world, therefore, corruption can never be a profitable business in the long run. The sooner the corrupt abandon the NRM sinking boat, the better for them in the long run. Moreover, there is neither integrity nor longevity in a corrupt institution. It eventually self-destructs. If the powerful communist regime in USSR was forced to go extinct in spite of its powerful secret police, the KGB, and so was the brutal racist apartheid regime, which was technologically the strongest regime on the African continent. NRM, a political midget by comparison, will inevitably go, no matter what anyone thinks to the contrary, and notwithstanding ESO, PPGU, chieftains of military intelligence, and so on and so on. Those will disappear sooner than later. As we pointed out in earlier conversations, political pressure and discrimination, such as tribalism and racism, are forms of corruption because they deliberately pervert justice and violate the rule of law in the same way as other types of corruption do. This means that the laws of history and social change we referred to in some conversations earlier eventually do destroy corrupt regimes like NRM, no matter how well armed and militarily efficient they may be at a particular time. In fact, those who are opposed to NRM we're planning to deal with those very effectively today. The corrupt accumulating wealth of unlawful, which is unlawful, should be warned that whatever they have acquired illegally will be recovered from them, no matter how long they delay or make a democratization of Uganda very difficult to achieve. I think I will stop here because my hour is gone, and I will continue next week. I invite you to come back to listen to the more exciting concluding part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Fellow citizens, we call upon you to practice resistance and protest against Museveni. We call upon you to oppose strongly the Museveni government, which is responsible for the downfall of Uganda. It is important to know that Museveni is afraid of the millions of people who are living for that day, for the light of day when Uganda will be liberated from his dictatorial regime. Fellow citizens, it's been 24 years of dictatorship. We should all know that at present our drive for freedom has already grown so strong that Museveni has already begun to change his tactics. We call upon people to participate, to organize silent stand-ins for a free Uganda. We call upon people to demonstrate that we're tired of him. We call upon governments in the United States of America